Hello and welcome to Future Imperfect. I'm your host, Admiral Phillips, and joining me on the USS Future Imperfect is...
Well, technically, according to the chapter, I'm Lieutenant Commander, but I'm the captain of this boat, though you are in charge, I guess? That's right, it's Mike the Birdman Dodd from thisweekingeek.net.
Yes, so it's been a while since we've recorded an episode of Future Imperfect, and there's been quite a lot in the Star Trek world that has kind of gone on. Namely, possibilities of a theme park, a couple of movie concepts, Discovery news, and Star Trek Online getting its newest expansion. Among them all.
Yeah, I mean, it's been like you said, a busy little bit, surprising little bit. So we'll have a little bit to definitely talk about and discuss on this episode. The theme park is the most unexpected news to me, but then again, you want to compete against the juggernaut that is Star Wars, you got to do something. I don't know how successful the theme park would be. I wonder if maybe building a Vegas attraction would have been maybe a smarter idea. Well, kind of like how they did back in the day with the Star Trek The Experience out to the Hilton.
Well, kind of the thing that's... the reason why they're doing this, really, is the fact that Universal Studios, as we know, used to hold the rights for all the Marvel theme parks before Disney owned it. And so it kind of makes it fitting that we would end up with the possibility, anyway, of getting a Star Trek theme park to replace it and kind of battle the Star Wars land, if it were. Basically, I mean, it's not a set in stone thing, but it's definitely something in the cards for Universal.
Yeah, like I said, it'll be interesting to see how they pull this off. I'm more interested in seeing how they're going to market Star Trek towards children, because if you've been watching, there's a series on Netflix called The Toys That Made Us.
Where they featured more about Star Wars and Star Trek?
Well, that's the problem. The Star Trek brand has never been child-friendly. When you really think about it, it's always been marketed towards the adult, towards the collector. And adult theme parks, yeah, they're a thing, and yeah, you can market towards them. It's just, how do you keep people constantly coming in? I mean, yeah, Star Trek has a dedicated fan base, but Star Wars tends to attract a younger audience. I mean, there's always something Star Wars going on, be it a movie, a television show, or something. With Star Trek, we just got Discovery, and the last time we had anything on TV was, 2004? Outside of the movies, which are, I don't know if I'd call the Kelvin universe exactly child-friendly. Well, definitely more wide appeal.
Well, I would say it's more wide appeal, and I wouldn't say Star Wars is all that child-friendly either.
Rebels, Clone Wars...
Animated series, they are. But when you look at the feature films, they're not.
I think I can make a pretty strong case for the original trilogy and episode 1. Maybe not so much episodes 2 and 3, as they are very heavy war stories, but definitely not. Rogue One was definitely not meant for kids. And same with The Last Jedi. I haven't seen Solo yet, so I really couldn't tell you.
I've seen Solo. I would kind of put it in the same boat.
Yeah. But I'd say Star Wars as a concept is a little bit more bright, a little bit more appealing, because you have characters like R2-D2 and C-3PO, plus you've had Ewoks and droids as cartoons. I would argue just the Star Wars brand is more family-friendly. As opposed to Star Trek is technically it's diplomats in space. Or it's a war story in space, whereas with Star Trek, or Star Wars rather, you can get a little bit more whimsical. There are whimsical episodes in Star Trek, do not get me wrong, but I think the marketeers are going to have their jobs cut out for them, especially when they start designing this theme park. How are you going to make it appeal to a mass audience that isn't, say, the dying fandom of the original series? Because a lot of those original fans, and I know this is going to be controversial for saying this, they're getting on in years. And even fans of the original series and TNG, Star Trek's a fandom that I'd argue, once again, Mike at thisweekingeek.net, yes, it's still there. It's still a fandom that's still very passionate and very strong. But I'd argue, I wonder if it's dying. Because if it weren't for these new movies, which we're going to talk about a little bit later in the show, I wonder what would happen with the brand. Because even the brand's 50th anniversary felt like a fart in the wind. When you compare it to all the stuff that happens with Star Wars, I mean, I don't know. I mean,
the problem I would argue that is the problem for the Star Trek brand is the fact that you have two companies that own the rights to two different sections of it, whereas Star Wars is unified.
Yes.
And I feel like if CBS and Paramount, if CBS owned all of the rights, I have a feeling we would see a lot more. Because they would want to milk it for all it's got.
Well, see, that's the question. That's the $1 million question right there. Dear Paramount and CBS, why don't you like making money? I like making money. Why don't you? And it's going to be some bureaucratic bullshit or some obscure licensing issue. It's got to be something really dumb that somebody really old just doesn't want to solve.
And its majority of it is to do with the feature films, which is why you see the CBS handling all the television properties, including the old stuff and the current, and anything that has to do with the original continuity of everything. Because everything from Bridge Commander to Star Trek Online is CBS controlled. And it's kind of mind-boggling that they just don't want to put the effort into it. Like, they don't want to turn it into this giant celebration. I mean, yeah, they have the yearly cruise, but that's for the most part unobtainable by most people.
Yeah, exactly. And there's only so many times you can hear them tell the same stories over and over again.
I can watch them on YouTube.
Yeah, I mean, I think the theme park's a fantastic idea, but I wonder if its heyday has already come and gone.
I think Trek has the possibility to hit a resurgence. However, it depends on, and we'll touch on this in Future Imperfect, or in All Things Altered Geek. Too many shows going on at once. But the fact that the fandoms are so toxic, they're attacking each other. And,
well, yeah,
and their own property that they should be supporting. Like, it's okay to disagree and dislike things. Like, I dislike the Klingons and the lack of explanation in Discovery. However, I like how it is starting to connect with the original series and make sense. So, like, I give it a pass, and I still watch it because it's Trek, but I don't give it 100% support, but I don't sit there and hate on it either.
Someone said this today on the internet, and I think it's probably the most wise thing I've seen. The internet was a horrible invention. It has brought out some of the worst toxicity in people, in fandoms ever. And I know Star Wars and Star Trek people have been at each other's throats since the very beginning. And it seems like it's only gotten worse. And I know the old joke in the 90s used to be you could sit in your mom's basement and bitch on Star Trek messaging boards, on BBSs, if you remember those things. Or here's something that'll date me just how old I am, on the old Usenet groups, which doesn't exist anymore.
Yep.
Or Star Trek mailing lists.
Yep.
Stuff like that.
Well, and those were back in the days when fan clubs actually were fan clubs.
Yeah, nowadays you pay your membership, and, well, there's issues with fan clubs, which I'm not going to talk about right now.
No.
But it's just, I don't know. I wonder if the Star Trek brand has experienced a resurgence, but if you need to keep that momentum moving forward, you need young, fresh blood at the helm. I don't know if Discovery's the way to go with it. It certainly got me interested in Star Trek again. but it is not my parents' Star Trek. Star Trek, frankly, does deserve the reboot that it's gotten. It is not our parents' Trek, but it's not Star Trek either in terms of what it wanted to accomplish.
No.
In terms of what the original vision of Gene Roddenberry was. And the Roddenberry estate does have a say in how Star Trek properties are still portrayed in the media. And I don't think the Kelvin universe, Star Trek Discovery are bad pieces of Star Trek, but I wonder what Gene Roddenberry would say. And his vision was focused out of something that came out of the 1940s and 50s, as he was a World War II bomber, I think. He was a cop at one point. He'd seen all these different things and had this vision of the future that obviously we all fell in love with, and that's the very genesis of this show. But a lot of things have changed in that time. As you saw, the writing on TNG evolved to express certain social ideas. And it seems to be now, if you have certain social ideas, you get labeled an SJW, and that's somehow a bad thing, and the liberal agenda or something. Like, I remember people were bitching about the gay character on Discovery, him and his boyfriend, the engineer and the doctor. I can't remember their names off the top of my head. But the franchise needs to evolve, and I don't know if in this climate of toxicity, if it can evolve the way that it should. And we'll talk about this on Altered Geek very much so, because I think community...
I think this deserves its own topic in and of itself.
I really do think so, yeah, because you have to look at the fandom in Star Trek. Is it just as toxic as other communities? Where will that goodwill or lack thereof take the property? Will it be able to move past what it's become and become something better, or will it become just another licensed property that falls by the wayside in a couple of years?
Yeah, it's really hard to tell. But kind of, if we're going to just kind of swing it back to the topic of the theme park, I saw an article on Geek and Sundry, and normally I don't really frequent them, but I thought it was kind of a valid point, and they kind of mentioned how there was this like Star Trek Adventure, a Universal Studios produced kind of themed live action performance attraction in the 80s and early 90s, and then they had it again in like the early 90s to mid 90s. Kind of, they take you in this kind of a bridge version of the Enterprise kind of thing. So anyways, they were saying to possibly set up like bridge reconstructions of, the original series set, the TNG set, Voyager, DS9, have basically the ability to, act out or kind of play Starship on some of it. Have like a Kobayashi Maru type of bridge crew, no-win scenario kind of simulator where you get to kind of encounter it. Alien encounters where everybody's dressed in various, very much a la Disney of people in character of different costumes. Like Quark's Bar and various things in that nature. So, I mean, like, I definitely think that would be something interesting to do. If you were setting up like a Star Trek land.
Yeah.
And I think it's great building blocks. I don't know if that would be enough. But I do think that would be something cool, that they could possibly do. I mean, you could turn like the tower dropping ride. You could essentially turn that into like the scene from the Kelvin universe where they're like dropping from the shuttle down to the Earth, kind of thing, and that would be something kind of cool to theme it as. But or have live action shows of reenactments of different Star Trek series or something. But I think that there's the possibilities there if the companies can get their head out of their rear. To not just have it as this like money bag thing, but kind of do it right.
Mm-hmm. Completely agree with you there.
So, I mean, we've already seen what they could do with like the bridge crew thing, so which is kind of interesting in and of itself, because now we're getting the Enterprise D and the uniforms on that new avatar. You can be an android. You could fight against the Romulans and the Borg and various roles in that. Like, I'm more interested in that than playing the Kelvin universe.
Yeah. And that's how... I think that's how you'll lure people in, but you'll also alienate the wide appeal. Yeah, you'll get people in with the classic universe of, Voyager, Enterprise, DS9, etc., etc. But a lot of moviegoers know the new stuff. They want the millennials. They want the people that grew up in the 90s and saw Star Trek in the 2000s. That's where a lot of the disposable money is. All the older people, sure, they'll spend their money because it's Star Trek, but you want new and fresh eyes on your property.
Which they kind of get that when you consider Star Trek Online. And I know it's a totally different style of platform. But the thing is they went free to play years ago and have come out with multiple expansions of the game. I think they're on episode or season 15 technically now, if all things considered. But it's kind of at the same time educating people on the entire, like, you have to have some kind of a knowledge of the original Star Trek universe. And then you have to, it basically creates new ties and new storylines within that universe, but the way that it's written and the way that it's done, it's very tastefully done. So it's like a natural evolution, or it's filling gaps of previous timeline aspects. So you've got a lot of timeline jumping between like Archer's timeline to the 28th or 29th century. And so you get a lot of post-Voyager. You get to run into, because they've cast a lot of the voice actors from Voyager. A lot of those were real easy to get in there. You have nobody from Enterprise. There's select people from TNG, like you've got Worf, you've got Geordi, and you've got like Sela and Tasha Yar, but like other than that, there's really nobody else from TNG. And then you've got they just dumped the mother load on the recent expansion, which was DS9, which I will argue by far is probably the best use of these characters and the best evolution of, because we've kind of gotten the natural evolution of all the other series, or seen a possible timeline or seen the timeline up to a certain point, and you kind of get this gist of, you get how the rest of their story is going. But DS9 was always the one that I was like, okay, where's the rest of it? And what happens to all these people after DS9? And you get to see like Ram, Nog, Worf, Quark, Bashir, Kira, Odo, Garrick. It was just and a couple of other random Ferengi characters, and Wayun and the Founders, and so I mean it's very entertaining to play through. Plus it's continuing very naturally. They even hinted at. And they even give you like a list of episodes of DS9 you should watch before you play the expansion, just so you're kind of caught up storyline wise of where they're going to be touching upon. Like where they had one of the Kais from Bajor get stuck on a planet because of robotic nanites, and they couldn't cure it at the time, and they managed to do that at this point because Kira is the current Kai. And so, like, you just kind of get to see a lot of natural progression of these characters, and these actors just seem like they've never fallen out of the roles, which is even more enticing. I've played it 3 times through with 3 different avatars or characters of mine, and it still doesn't get old. And then by the end of it, like, I think I played, like, 6 episodes. It's, like, to be continued, and I'm like, no! But they also let you now play as... Dominion characters. They let you play as Cardassians. They let you play as pretty much everything. So it's a lot of fun. They just bumped up the episode or the levels from 60 to 65. You get a free, like I just got the Galaxy class starship with the saucer separation, which is pretty slick, especially when you've got the All Good Things 3 nacelle version.
That's pretty cool.
So, like I said, there's a lot going on in the game, a lot of new stuff that they've added. But it's like you actually get to explore the Gamma Quadrant, which is something I've always been like just kind of questioning and wanting to know more about. So
one of the things you might be interested into, Steve, is I know I've touched upon it before. Speaking of Star Trek games, the Star Trek role-playing game by Modiphius just released their Beta Quadrant expansion and their Command section, like 2 brand new source books. And it's officially licensed by CBS, so a lot of stuff you may not know about the Beta Quadrant, they flesh out.
Oh, nice.
Which is kind of cool. And like I said, we'd have to get you into a Star Trek game at some point on Terrible Warriors if we can somehow make the recording setup work. That's one thing I will say. If CBS has done anything right, licensing the property out to the right licensees has been really smart. As with the Star Trek Online game, the role-playing game has been treated really well. It's receiving awards, as far as I know. I know on Terrible Warriors, we're playing through the living campaign right now. If you want to check that over on terriblewarriors.com. I know we have an interview with one of the Star Trek writers that Justin did a little while ago. And there also is Star Trek, like you said, a Bridge Commander, which now has the Enterprise DLC where you fight the Borg. And allegedly you can play this thing in non-VR now.
Yep.
Though I'm not sure how that works. I'd be playing it on PlayStation 4, obviously. But I don't know how.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious how that works. I've thought about it for the PC. But yeah, I don't know. It's definitely something I'd like to check out just because you get to pilot the Enterprise D. Which I think is cool.
I'm interested. I just don't know if I'm $60 interested.
Yeah, that's the main point there for me is I'm not really sure what's going to happen there. But or when they're going to have like a possible discount. Like to me it's like $20 like for the non-VR version. Like I could see it for the VR version because it's a lot of extra camera movement. But yeah, I just don't know. It's still too much for me to want to jump in, especially when I could play Star Trek Online for free. Like, it literally costs nothing to play, like, unless you really want to.
Yeah, I mean, I'm actually kind of surprised there was DLC for it in the first place, which means the title obviously sold. I'd be curious to know what the player base is or something like that, because Ubisoft could very easily give you those numbers since you have to connect to online servers for it. So... But I guess it sold well enough amongst us dorks to warrant that. Whether the game will get any more DLC, I'd be very curious. I'm guessing in no small part to Discovery, because of its popularity on TV, that's probably why there's a renewed interest in Star Trek. So,
yep, and so, and then kind of moving into, since we're kind of talking the various licensees or issues with CBS and Paramount, it's been mentioned multiple times that there's going to be 2 Star Trek films running concurrently.
Yeah, one which will be Star Trek 4, but not written by Simon Pegg and his writing partner. And then there's talk of a Tarantino-esque Star Trek.
Mm-hmm. Which it would basically be its own standalone. Which I almost wonder if that would be better if they just had random standalone Trek films of just different eras. Just as something fun to do.
Here's my issue with that. Look what happened to Solo. And I think that'll be a big indication. Is the movie going public ready for something like that?
But the difference between Trek and Star Wars is Star Wars, the fan base doesn't have... I mean, yes, they have like 30 plus years of history, whereas Star Trek has 50 plus years. But Star Trek also had a lot of television series to kind of cover.
Yeah, but the last time one was on in force was 2004. Plus, you're going to have to look at it from a marketing point of view. What's a more marketable property? the billions of dollars that Star Wars brings in versus Star Trek. Ask yourself this. If you walked into your average Walmart, Target, or I was going to say Toys R Us, but that doesn't matter anymore.
Well, KB Toys, that'll be back.
Okay, so yeah, if you walk into your average toy store, what's going to be easier to find? A Star Trek toy or a Star Wars toy?
To be fair, they haven't had good Star Trek toys since
Art Asylum.
Well, yeah,
Still
I mean that company, that hands down, but they haven't had like official like just in the store Trek toys since Voyager.
Actually, you're wrong because
DS9?
Playmates held the license again for Star Trek when the Kelvin Universe movies came out.
Yeah, but they were so poorly marketed that I didn't even like. Yeah, now that you mentioned it, I remember those. But they didn't even look like the actors.
I think there was a fair likeness for most of them.
But when you look at the First Contact figures compared, the First Contact figures looked exactly like their actor. Like, they weren't Art Asylum great, but they were much better than the Kelvin universe.
I think the problem is, once again, it's how you market a property like Star Trek to kids. And that's what's always going to drive it. I mean, as much as we want it to be about the high ideals of a future where we want society to work for each other, it all comes down to dollars and cents now. And it's how can I slap it on a plastic lunchbox? And marketing ultimately determines the fate of these things. Now, having a standalone movie would be cool, but you're not getting that in theaters. No friggin' way. Now, if you did it on, say, Kickstarter and said, hey, we're pitching this to Netflix. Hell, you could put this on Netflix.
Oh, yeah.
Or CBS Access. Then, yes, then you've got a possibility of something happening on a much smaller scale. Because look what they did with Star Trek Renegades.
Mm-hmm.
They made that for well under a feature film budget. So if you're willing to do a smaller scale Star Trek story, then yeah, you could definitely get something. If it's officially given the seal of approval by CBS, then sure. But you will not see a standalone movie in theaters. No way, no how. The franchise is not that profitable.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sorry to say that, but that's the problem with Star Trek. It's on life support. It got a jolt in the arm with Discovery, but once again, you ask a kid, what's more exciting, phasers or lightsabers? I can tell you what the answer is going to be 9 out of every 10 times. And it sucks to say that because I know I've been pretty hardcore Star Wars on this episode, but I'm a Star Trek fan too.
See, I think where the difference lies is like I think that the uniforms, technology, and the ships are more memorable in Trek. Although lightsaber is definitely like way up there.
Well, look at it this way: Star Trek tells political and moral stories.
Star Wars is swashbuckling. Yeah. It's the difference between Mr. Smith Goes to Washington and, say, Robin Hood. Both are excellent movies, but for different reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing. It's hard to get kids interested in something political. In Star Wars, you can dress it up with monsters, the Sith, and all this other crap. And it doesn't work. But, and I kind of lost where I was going with this train of thought.
But no, I mean, like, I get it. I'm just saying, like, I think what they've done with Discovery, like, granted, it's not what I would do in some stretch of the means. I don't think that they should have gone back in time. I think that they either A, should have completely rebooted the universe and started from scratch and said, that was 50 years of canon, and we're just, we're going to leave it alone. We're not going to touch it, and we're going to just start over and then start off with brand new characters, brand new everything, and then just kind of reinvent it. much in the vein of how they did, Lost in Space. Like, literally the only thing that kind of existed was some of the naming and some of the, aspects. They redid practically everything else. And I think that would have been more beneficial to Trek at this point. Whereas Star Wars just had gotten a shot in the arm from Disney, and unfortunately, like, it's starting to even kind of fizzle a little bit because, again, they're traversing into the past instead of creating new.
And even that's having problems too, because the audience reaction on The Last Jedi, you either loved it or you hated it.
Because it touched on original character continuity.
That's true, and that's part of the big problem.
And that's the thing, is I think with Colin Trevorrow or whoever it is that's doing the new trilogy that they're working on, that's going to be completely standalone. And then you've got Jon Favreau, who's doing the television series. I think that although his is going to take place after episode 6, so it kind of leaves a little gray area on that, depending on what direction they go in it. But I guess it's supposed to follow the fall of the Empire and the beginning of the First Order, and kind of in that realm. But either way, I think that those are more beneficial because there's area to tell things in, instead of doing, let's do a character origin story. Or, let's go back and let's go, 10 years before Kirk. Because they'd already gotten, like, Trek had gotten, beaten with a shovel when Enterprise came out, because it was, made like 40 years, like 30 some odd years, 40 years after the original series. And it took place 100 years before Kirk. And some of the things were just as advanced, or if not more, and people were beating it with a shovel then. And then you look at Discovery, and it's almost worse, whereas I think if they would have pushed it beyond, 30 to 50 years beyond Voyager, half the technology they've got in there would have been more believable.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's... When you go digging in the past, you're going to come up with so many problems. And Star Trek nerds are the worst for this.
Although Star Wars fans are getting just as bad.
Yeah, because you look at the technology from episode 1 to episode 4, and you're like, wait a minute. Yeah, I completely agree. Well, knobs and switches from holograms like Tony Stark, not so much.
Yeah. So yeah, it's definitely out there with some of it. It's very difficult to kind of gauge on how well they could do with it, because, like, even recently, like a week and a half ago, they released a image of the Enterprise bridge from Discovery, like what it looks like, and it doesn't look like what we're used to. Like, yeah, it's got the little rings that go around the command chair. You've got the command chair looks pretty like the original series command chair. Like, that's like one of the main iconic features. But all of the screens, all of the, like, everything is like shinier. It's all like digital compared to the original series, where it was all like weird things that just swirled and had nothing on them. Which that I kind of understand. Like, at the time they didn't have that stuff, so I kind of get updating some of that. But in some of the colors are brighter on the corridors and some of the other stuff. But it'll be interesting to see what it looks like when it's fully lit, because it's kind of a dark image.
I don't know. I'm skeptical, but we'll see what happens. I did like Discovery. I think crossing Enterprise into it is a big friggin' risk.
Well,
but
especially
they're banking on nostalgia.
Especially when they don't want to touch Leonard Nimoy's character of Spock. And they're kind of putting themselves in this odd predicament, because this is supposed to be after the Cage. With Captain Pike. Like, they're going to have Captain Pike in this, obviously, because he's one of the actors from the Inhumans. But he's going to be, playing the captain of the Enterprise. You're going to see probably somebody playing number 1, the female, Majel Barrett's original character, and then you'll probably see some other people, because, like, at the time they didn't have. I think they were close to having, like, Sulu or Scotty or somebody on there. But Spock's definitely there, so it kind of leaves this weird place for them to kind of touch on with it. So, and then of course there's all these rumors swirling. Like somebody tried to kind of question Patrick Stewart into, he's like, oh, they're like, are you watching the new series? And he's like, no, but I might have a reason to. And so people were like, oh, he might be in the series. And they're like, jumping to conclusions like crazy people. And, Marina Sirtis has been on set, with Jonathan Frakes, which, it could be just maybe he invited them to see it.
I'd be okay if they had to bring him in, you know what I mean? Or if they had to bring Picard and Troy and Frakes back. If it was a time travel thing, I'd be okay with that.
It would be interesting because they're not touching the spore drive anymore. They
give it time.
They mothballed it. I don't think they'll touch it. I think there'll be some other MacGuffin, but I think that they won't touch the spore drive. And there is like there's no casting rumors. He's not even not even technically listed anymore as far as that stuff's concerned. So,
which sucks because he was such a cool character.
Mm-hmm. It was such a different, like, I almost got a Cisco vibe.
Yeah, he was willing to kill and he needed to do what he had to do, and that's what I appreciated about him.
Yeah, because I just watched an episode of DS9 recently where Cisco's on the Defiant with all of the DS9 crew, and he's hunting the Maquis, and the Maquis, did bomb some planet, sabotage the Defiant, sabotage another vessel with a fleet admiral on it, and Cisco made it a personal vendetta and then just laced quantum torpedoes with trilithium and then dumped it on the Maquis planets, like, to purposely evacuate them and just to get back at this one guy, like, and everybody was just going nuts over it, and he's just like, all right, bomb another one, and they're like, no, I'll give myself up and all of our weapons. I'm like, yeah, Cisco doesn't play around, so
no.
Lorca's very much like that. So yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of wondering where they're going to go with it. I did see an interesting theory though about the Klingons, and you might like this concept too. Somebody posted, what if those really were the Klingons? The designs. Are you familiar with the race, the Afrosians?
I most certainly am not.
Okay. Well, the Afrosians are... Do you remember the character from either Star Trek 3 or Star Trek 6 with the white goatee and the white hair that went to the back?
Vaguely.
They basically look like a Klingon without forehead and nose ridges.
Okay, yeah.
Somebody made this crazy thought that maybe there was an Afrosian and Klingon hybrid, and that's how we got all of the Klingons that became more established in the later series. Like, it's a convoluted way of thinking about it, but it almost kind of more makes sense than, hey, we got these Klingons and none of them match anything we've ever seen in Trek.
I have no response to that, sorry.
But I liked the concept, anyways. And then I saw something else. Somebody posted, they redid the original series Enterprise Bridge. They took a screenshot of it and then remapped it. With all the dials and everything else, and then they completely remapped all of the screens and the link and everything else, and kind of gave it a more of a Discovery type style look to it. But it still looks
a vibe, yeah.
It still looks true to the original series, but it kind of took some of the Kelvin and the Discovery elements and turned what we're used to in the original series into the new. But it was a nice meld of the two, so I'm a crazy person. I look at all these things. I think they're cool.
Yeah, you're kind of a dork, but
yeah.
That's okay.
So, So yeah, anything else you want to touch on in this episode?
Off the top of my head, no. I mean, I'm looking forward to seeing what'll happen if the Tarantino Star Trek ever takes off. I'll be very surprised.
Which Frakes doesn't seem to think so.
Yeah, I don't think so either. I think he's a popular director who has an interest. We'll see what happens. If he really wants it to happen, pitch it to Netflix or CBS All Access. Ask for a much smaller budget. And if you want to make a Star Trek, maybe they'll give you an episode of Discovery, or hey, here's a 3-part arc with Quentin Tarantino directing, or something like that. That's what I suspect will happen if he can't get his movie made. If he really loves the property, he'll do something with it. Outside of that, no, I'm interested to see if Star Trek Bridge Commander will get more DLC in it. I'm not super optimistic because TNG seems to be where most of the love affair ends. Unless you're a hardcore fan, then it's DS9. Mm-hmm. Although it wouldn't surprise me if they get something for Star Trek Discovery.
I'm almost surprised they don't. Because that would be logical.
But that's also a lot of money to a game development studio. So I can see why not. But we'll have to wait and see. So that's what a lot of my feelings are on Star Trek right now. You're going to have to wait and see. I mean, I'm happy with the role-play products. I'm happy with the licensing, how it's been mostly handled. The theme park, I think the idea is going to fizzle. But I wouldn't be opposed to a new Vegas experience that was a little bit more expansive. Mm-hmm. If you're going to strike while the iron's hot.
Yep, I completely agree. They need to hit it now rather than later, because it's hard to tell what people will get into anymore.
Exactly. You can't bank on fans because fans are fickle.
And they're a-holes too.
Yeah, and it comes down to, can you get little Timmy, little Tina interested? So we'll wait and see what happens.
Yep. So until next time, I've been Captain Phillips or Admiral Phillips.
I've been Captain Michael the Birdman Dodd. Wow, I called myself Michael. That's weird. Anyway, until next time. I know, it's friggin' strange. So anyway, guys, until next time, live long and prosper. Welcome to the Replicator. I am Captain Mike the Birdman Dodd, and today on the Replicator we're taking a look at something kind of cool coming to us from FameTech. We are looking at Star Trek, the Next Generation Bluetooth speaker, which happens to look like the USS Enterprise NCC 1701-D. That's right, Captain Picard's good old Enterprise from Star Trek, the Next Generation fame. And this is a Bluetooth speaker that is actually kind of cool. Obviously being officially licensed, which means it has all the detail you come to expect. More highly detailed than, say, the Playmates 1994 toy of the Enterprise, but not exactly studio scale. This thing is probably a little less than 12 inches across. Fairly small scale. I mean, if you go to ThinkGeek.com, it's a ThinkGeek.com exclusive over there. You can see just how big this thing is. But it sits pretty nice. It displays relatively well. So what this thing includes, it gives you sound clips of the warp drive, an engine hum, torpedo, auto-destruct, incoming transmission. Now, it's also a Bluetooth phone, or a Bluetooth speaker rather, which means it can connect to your phone, your tablet, or even your PC. One of the neat things about this is actually a white noise generator as well. So if you have trouble sleeping like me, you can fall asleep to the sound of the engine hum. If you go on YouTube, there's people that have done the similar thing where they just have main engineering as the sound, but if you can fall asleep to the engine hum from the Enterprise, that's just as comforting and a little piece of sci-fi future here and now. Now the cool thing is this thing also lights up, and this thing is bright. The warp nacelles light up, the main deflector dish lights up. It's cool. Now, if you press the bridge itself on top of the Enterprise, it'll actually make sounds, which you can do that in kind of demo mode and whatnot. Now, I did have two problems with this thing. I did have trouble syncing it up the first time to my iPad because I had to have it put into Bluetooth detection mode. So after fiddling with the power settings for a couple of minutes, basically holding it down, pressing it a couple of times, eventually I was just able to fiddle with it, and it happened. It'll show up on your Bluetooth-capable device as NCC 10701-D. It shows up as the Enterprise, basically, and it'll connect. Now, this thing has a built-in USB rechargeable battery with a purported 8-hour life. I've been testing this thing for a little over 2 weeks now, and I would argue I get between 4 and 6 hours. So I don't know whether I'm not charging it long enough or whether my particular unit just won't last that long. I mean, either way, if you pull this thing out as a white noise generator, the white noise only lasts for 60 minutes anyway. Or if you're listening to music in your room, you're probably not going to be listening it for a full 8 hours, give or take. Though they do recommend not having this thing plugged in at the same time and using it. So please advise that little bit of caution. I was able to get fairly decent range out of this thing. I was able to go right across my apartment with my iPad and not lose Bluetooth connectivity as I was listening to the streaming app for WMMR, which is a radio station out of Philadelphia, and I never once lost connectivity. So this thing retails for about $80 USD on ThinkGeek.com, and you're asking, is that worth it? Well, you're getting a fairly decent quality Bluetooth speaker. It's loud, it's crystal clear, and it's a licensed Star Trek collectible, so you're paying probably about $60 for the speaker itself and $20 for the license. And it is a pretty cool piece of memorabilia to have in your office. And the fact that it can be a covert speaker, which means this thing can sit on a shelf above your desk, above your computer, and you can just connect it to Spotify or any streaming app or whatever, and it works beautifully. So that is my review of the Star Trek The Next Generation Enterprise D Bluetooth speaker coming to us from FameTech. You should probably check it out. Now throwing things back to Admiral Stephen Phillips right here on Future Imperfect.